Hey y'all, today's video is definitely one of the most highly requested ones that I've had, and that is on the Vietnamese Mossy Frogs. So I'm happy to partner with Exo Terra once again on this build. They were kind enough to send me not only the Frog Terrarium, which I did a much more in-depth review and a little bit more advanced build on, so definitely be sure to check that out, linked in the video. But the tree frog terrarium has all of the same features. This one is just an 18 by 18 by 24 as opposed to the dart frog, which is an 18 cube. But definitely continue watching if you want to see how I put these guys' new home together. But since this is a species that has definitely seen a surge in popularity, I wanted to do a little bit of a more in-depth species spotlight on them. And so I've had mine for about 3.5, 4 years now. I got them from Patrick Neighbors of Saurian Enterprises. To my knowledge, he was one of the first people in the country to successfully breed these guys. And he's definitely been a very knowledgeable source of information regarding the species. He's also who I personally recommend going through if you're looking to get Vietnamese mossy frogs. He produces excellent quality stock. I have two that are going to be living in this enclosure. This little dude is one of my males, and you can tell right here, these guys get little red swollen nuptial pads. And so this is a male. Like most tree frogs, they do exhibit sexual dimorphism. And so the males are going to be smaller. He's about 2.5, 2 3/4 inches or so. And the females get to be about 1 inch bigger and generally a bit plumper, more rotund, as is common in your tree frog species. But these guys are really unique. It's no wonder that they're gaining in popularity. A lot of people ask me about them, ask me when I'm going to have them available, ask me how to set up their enclosure, that kind of thing. So I'm definitely happy to help share that information. But you can see, there he goes, where they get their name from. So Vietnamese mossy frogs in particular hail from the northern region of Vietnam into Hainan, China, as I believe. And they are masters of camouflage. So you can see I put a lot of moss in their enclosure on purpose. They feel very comfortable, very at home in that. And in the wilds, they are uniquely adapted to living in that kind of environment and, you know, avoiding getting preyed upon due to their insanely cool camouflage. As far as a setup for them, probably the most common question I get asked, I definitely recommend keeping these guys in a paludarium. I made the mistake when I first got them. I put a lot of time and effort into building their first home for my group. And I did, like an island land portion with water around. They were constantly in the water, guys. These guys are much more aquatic than, most of the tree frogs that people keep. Red eyes, dumpies, and the like. So you're really doing yourself and the animals a disservice if you don't just provide them water. With that said, the water quality is very important for mossies. And what I mean by that is this species in particular is really susceptible to bacterial infections. From my time in the vet field and my personal experience talking to other keepers of them, that seems to be the number one issue that people have. And what I always recommend is keeping very organic, tannin-rich water whenever you are housing Vietnamese mossy frogs. And so the tannins have natural antibacterial and antimicrobial properties to them. And these guys spend a lot of time in the water. So you do not want to have crystal clear water with them. That can oftentimes lead to ulcerations, little lesions, and blisters that are going to have to be treated by an experienced veterinarian. And y'all, I'll be the first to tell you, it's pretty difficult to find a veterinarian that's really well versed in amphibian medicine. So it's a problem you really want to try and avoid. But how you get that tannin-rich water is with the hardscape and the leaves, wood, things like that you add into it. So you can see this is a nice tea colored. That's exactly what you want with the mossy frogs. I cannot stress enough, you do not want crystal clear water. If the tannin-rich water is going to bother you, don't keep mossies. So quart tubes can be very, very important for mossy frogs. A, they provide security and nice coverage for them. And B, if you're trying to breed them, these guys naturally breed in like rock crevices and tree hollows in particular in the wild. So you can see I purposely left this space open for this pair to go in and out of. And they'll lay their eggs on the side of the cork right above the water line, and the tadpoles will drop into the water. And the purpose that serves is it serves, a little bit of protection for them, help keep the offspring from being predated on. And usually the tree hollows get full of really organic, rich water. And so their young are going to have food in there to eat, such as, insect larvae, dead insects, things like that. But this also leaches tannins into the water, so it serves multi-purposes. I have driftwood in here, and then also things like thicker cuticle leaves that break down slower. So your Indian almond leaves and your magnolia leaves work excellent. So you can see I added quite a bit of leaf litter, which you'll see more in depth in the build video. But they're not a particularly difficult frog to care for. Like I said, the biggest mistake I think people make is keeping them on land. Really, water is the best way to go for them. You'll get to see their natural behaviors and see them more comfortable. Not to mention, it's just a better way to promote good health for them. Another thing about these guys I get asked is, how do you feed them if you keep them in a straight water base? For me personally, I've never had an issue just putting things like crickets and roaches dusted onto the bigger pieces of hardscape. I feed at night after the lights have gone out, and these guys, like most frogs or pigs, they're going to go chow down on them. If you're having issues with that, or maybe you don't have as much hardscape in there or places for the insects to have dry land, what you can do is take like a 16 or 32 ounce deli cup, put your dusted insects in there, and just float it in the water. And that serves as a dry, safe place for your insects to stay and for your frogs to feed them. That's also a great trick if you're housing juvenile frogs, like cinnamon tree frogs, the mossies, anything that's aquatic, and you want to be able to monitor their food intake. The floating dish is a good tried and true method with that. But the mossies love a lot of cover. Obviously, you can't go wrong with moss, quart tubes, driftwood, lots of foliage. You do want thicker plants for these guys since they are bigger and, active little dudes. You don't want to put super delicate plants in there. They are a colder weather species, so definitely no heat for them. Make sure they don't get, honestly, in my opinion, my experience, above mid-70s. They do really, really well in the cooler temperatures, down into the 60s for these guys. They are still a little bit rare, granted a lot more easier than they used to be to find in the hobby. And that is due to a really unique adaptation of the mossy frogs. Most of my information I learned came from Patrick, who, like I said, breeds them. And these are, to my knowledge, the only amphibians I know of currently that exhibit temperature-dependent sex determination, just like sea turtles, for instance. And so the vast majority that you come across are males. And what Patrick said is, if you raise the tadpoles in standard room temperature water, like what most people do, you're going to get, more often than not, males. I've heard of people getting a large group of juveniles, trying to raise them up, better their odds of getting a female. There was one guy I know that got like a dozen of them. They all turned out to be males. And so what the most common method is to do what's called cold raising. And so what that means is raising the tadpoles in water that's colder than 70 degrees. And it's not a guarantee, but that does increase your odds of getting females. But if you do plan on breeding them, or that's your intention of getting them, definitely keep that in mind. They can definitely be like unicorns, and you may be looking for a long time to find a female of a Vietnamese mossy frog. But these guys, you know, they belong to the family Rhacophoridae. This particular genus is Theloderma, and the exact species is Theloderma corticale. A lot of people don't realize there's actually several species of mossy frogs, but the Vietnamese Theloderma corticale is definitely the most common one in my experience that you'll come across in the hobby. So with that said, I hope y'all enjoyed this little species spotlight on these wicked cool little dudes. They have the most amazing eyes. That is my absolute favorite thing about them. There's really nothing else with eyes like them. I say that because he's giving me the eye right now, and their eyes are just so gorgeous. But I hope y'all enjoyed learning a little bit about the species, and continue watching to learn a little bit about how to build their home. Last thing I want to touch on is, like I said, my dart frog build was a little bit more advanced. I still definitely think, you know, a beginner can do it if you're mentally prepped and have all your materials. But I frequently get asked, you know, can you do a more simple build? One that's not crazy hardscape, crazy expensive, or difficult plants to care for. And so this is what I wanted to highlight with this build. This is definitely a beginner friendly and honestly a more budget friendly build. The benefit when you're doing an aquatic base is you don't have to pay for substrate or drainage layer or anything like that. And none of the plants in here are crazy expensive or difficult to care for. And the background I made is pretty simple. Once again, not too complex, cost about $7 to make. So I hope y'all enjoy that, and you know, find the confidence to start building your own enclosures. To start things off with this build, I did an insulation foam board background carved out with the Dremel with the coarse sanding bit and the Quickcrete pigmented dry lock technique. Very important to very thoroughly rinse off the background whenever you use that Quickcrete and the dry lock. So this is just a clip of that. And then equally important, anytime you're using a water feature in a tank, definitely water check your tank. Make sure it holds water. And so this is me, sorry it kind of cut off, but I am just scoring, basically texturizing that foam board background. And take a razor blade, a knife, whatever you have handy, and you just want to make texture all over the back of it. And that's going to help form a nice tight seal with your silicone to your background of the glass. And that's going to help keep it from peeling up or pulling away from the glass. And then to silicone it in place, I personally use the API Clear Aquarium silicone. Run a little bead all over the back of that background and firmly adhere it to the back of the tank. And definitely let that dry for at least a good 24 hours. I let mine dry outside, which I find helps out a little bit faster, but you don't want any fumes in it whenever you're building it out, and definitely not when you're putting animals in. But if y'all would like a more in-depth tutorial on how I make these foam backgrounds, definitely let me know and I'd be happy to do that. And now I have checked the tank, make sure it's watertight, installed their old pump that I had from one of their old tank builds in there, nothing fancy. And I am working on hardscaping now. So like I talked about in the little species spotlight, cork tubes, in my opinion, are a must with mossy frogs. They definitely utilize them, and especially if you're trying to breed them. And then I just have some cool pieces of driftwood and some smaller cork tubes that I'm putting in there. And you can see I definitely tried to make this a little bit more beginner-friendly, simple build. So I'm not doing any crazy hardscape, not siliconing or foaming any of it in place. And now I'm just kind of playing around with some plants. So I put in a Neoregelia bromeliad in that cork tube. I find that mine like to perch on them quite a bit. And y'all, this emerald gem that I'm fiddling around with now,
That actually came directly out of their enclosure. That thing is a monster. I actually had to trim it back quite a bit before I put it in this tank. The root system on it is absolutely incredible, and it does quite well just growing in water. I mean, I've had that one growing in their current enclosure for probably 2 years now. And I know a lot of people don't like it. They think it's boring, or veteran keepers, kind of trash talk it. But you can see I used some neon, otherwise known as limelight pothos in there. It's a really versatile plant, guys. Don't be afraid to use it. Also does well in water. And now, since we are working with mossy frogs, of course I have to add a good amount of moss in there. And these are some tropical branches that I get from a good friend of mine that are covered in moss. They are sustainably harvested from her property, and they are amazingly beautiful. I absolutely love incorporating them into my builds. And I know the mossy frogs are gonna love them. I've had some in there with my group before, and they love to just perch on them, camouflage themselves in there. And now I'm just taking some sheets of moss that I get from the same friend of mine. Just different varieties. I'll be honest with y'all, I am no moss expert. I'm kind of sucky at identifying all the different mosses. But I love the way that they grow in the enclosures and the aesthetic that they provide. And I'm placing some against that background, and I've had good luck with that stuff building, or rather kind of taking over the background as well, which is my goal for this enclosure. And right here I am just adding some damp sphagnum moss around the base of that bromeliad. Since it is just fixed into the quart tube, I want to make sure it stays nice and secure, since it is living with some larger bodied frogs. I don't want them disrupting it too terribly much. And once again, like I talked about earlier in the beginning of the video, right here I'm going to be adding quite a few magnolia leaves into the water. And I also found some extra Indian almond leaves that I added off camera, but those are both great options for adding those beneficial tannins into the water. Not to mention, they do help provide additional coverage or a sense of security for the frogs while they are in the water. So it is more likely that you're going to see them kind of upfront and personal, rather than them just hiding in the back all the time, whenever they have that extra sense of security throughout the tank, both in the water and in the terrestrial portion. And with any good enclosure, I'm just adding some springtails in here. I find that the springtails do perfectly fine without any substrate. I do not add any isopods in there though. And you can see here this lovely duo of mossy frogs. So a fun fact about these guys is they will flip over, curl up, and play dead, like this little dude was demonstrating there. And number 2, fixing to make its way into the enclosure. But I love these guys. I just plan on keeping these 2 in here since it is an 18-18-24. I don't want to overcrowd it. But y'all, I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to drop a like and a comment down below and let me know what you think or what you'd like to see in the future. But thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all on the next one.